Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the first of two webinars from the Bicycle team in which we'll present our preliminary findings. Bicycle stands for Born in COVID Year Core Lockdown Effects, and it's a 3-year study funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, hosted at City St George's, University of London, and collaboration between 5 other UK universities. Over the course of the following hour, you will hear first of all, an introduction to the study from one of the study leads, Professor Lucy Henry, who will then hand over to the other study lead, Professor Nikki Botting, who will talk some more about developmental outcomes for 4-year-old children who were born in the first COVID lockdown. And then we'll hear a response to our findings from our guest speaker, Susan Mumby, who's a primary school head teacher based in Leeds. And please, throughout the course of all 3 presentations, do put your questions in the Q&A space and vote for other questions that you see there, and we'll answer as many as we can. And then we will close the webinar just before 4:30 with a series of audience polls in which you can respond to our findings yourselves. So first of all, I'm delighted to hand over to Professor Lucy Henry.
Thank you very much, Becky, and a warm welcome to everybody. It's lovely to speak to you about the bicycle study today. So I'm going to start off with an introduction and a little bit of background about our study. So what was the main aim of the bicycle study? Well, we wanted to answer one key question, and that was as follows. Did being born in lockdown affect talking, thinking, or motor skills at 4 years of age? So we know that babies who were born between March and June 2020 in England experienced an unprecedented disruption to their first year. And this disruption included social, environmental, and communication experiences. As developmental psychologists, we know that the first 5 years are important for developing talking, thinking, and motor skills. And these early years provide a foundation for children's later development. We also know that emerging research evidence is pointing to at least some COVID impacts. So it's very important that we study these very carefully. So who is taking part in the bicycle study? Well, we're seeing families and children from all walks of life and from all regions of England. We have 3 different groups and around 200 children and families in each of these groups. The first group are children who were born before the lockdowns were brought into play. These are children who were babies or toddlers when lockdowns were imposed. The second group, and this is the group that we're going to be focusing on today, were children who were born in lockdown. And they were born in those restricted dates I've mentioned between March and June 2020. The final group we're still collecting data with, and these were children who were born after all of the lockdowns had been released in July 2021. So how are we measuring whether lockdown affected talking, thinking, or motor skills? So firstly, we've completed a number of tasks and games directly with the children, and these are all to assess their talking and thinking skills. Most of these children are taking part remotely via Zoom, but we're going into schools and nurseries to see a small number of children as well. The second thing we're doing is asking caregivers to fill in a series of questionnaires, and these cover their child's talking, thinking, and motor skills, as well as some wider questions about development and family circumstances. Another arm of our study involves interviewing caregivers about their experiences of early parenting. And if you want to hear all about this, please come to our second webinar, A Fortnight Today. So what specific skills are we going to report on today? So in terms of talking, we're going to consider how well children can say words and say sentences. We're also going to consider how well children can understand words and sentences. In terms of thinking, we have a caregiver report where caregivers have been asked about their child's complex thinking and planning skills. And the sorts of areas the questionnaire covers are: can their child stay on task? Can they remember instructions? And can they regulate their emotions? We'll also tell you about motor skills, which was again assessed with a caregiver questionnaire. And here caregivers were asked about everyday motor skills. Things like, can their child catch a ball? And can their child use a pencil or crayon? So overall, we have information in 3 important domains. We have information about expressive and receptive language, about executive functioning, and also about movement and coordination. So I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, Nikki Botting, and she's going to tell you all about the preliminary findings.
Thanks, Lucy. So what did we find? First of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the families that took part in the study. So on the left-hand side, you'll see our rainbow pie chart here, which looks at the different postcode classifications that our families came from, with red being the least advantaged postcode areas, round to the pink being the most advantaged postcode regions. And as you can see, we've got a really nice spread of families from all types of postcode areas, with a little bit more engagement from families in the most advantaged postcode areas. On the right of the screen, there's a table with lots of numbers in. I'm not going to talk all through every number on this table, but I just want to highlight that the children were between 4 and 5, that the sample of families that took part are really very representative of the general population in England in terms of their gender, ethnicity, multilingualism. And in terms of maternal education, we have slightly more families who have a degree or a postgraduate degree. So first of all, I'm going to summarise the overall findings. So when we looked at children born in lockdowns, talking, thinking and motor skills against levels expected pre-pandemic for 4-year-olds, we found that complex thinking and planning skills were below average in our group. We found that motor skills and saying sentences were about at the expected level for 4-year-olds. And we found that understanding sentences and words and saying words were also above average for this group. So I'm going to unpick that a little bit more with a graph. Now, first of all, I'll just orient you a little bit to what this graph is showing. So in the center of this graph, along the middle, we'll see a dark black line, and that is the expected level for age. So that's the score we would expect 4-year-olds to have based on pre-pandemic information. And then from left to right, we have the talking skills in light green, the understanding skills in dark green, complex thinking and planning in purple, and motor skills in orange. So when we look at, first of all, complex thinking and planning, this is our key finding from our results, that that complex thinking and planning skills were lower for this group on average than we would expect 4-year-olds to have. When we look at talking and motor skills, these scores were broadly in the average range for the children in our group. But when we look at the understanding skills, so understanding words and understanding sentences, these skills were actually better than we expected for their age based on pre-pandemic norms. So we've got low complex and thinking skills, we've got average talking and motor skills, but we've got good understanding skills in this group of children. And we wanted to look not just at the average scores, but also at how many children this individually affected. So on this slide, we have the two areas where we found more children than expected with low scores. So on the left, we have saying sentences. And you can see here that the darker shaded sections of this pie chart are the children who scored low or very low on this measure. And then on the right, you'll see that the darker shaded sections again are the low scorers for complex thinking and planning. And hopefully you can see that although in both these cases, there are more children than expected in the low scoring sections, for complex thinking and planning, this was particularly marked, with about a third of our children scoring low on this measure. And the good news is that the pale part of these pie charts is children who were performing as expected for age in these areas. So why is this study important? Well, we think our findings may suggest that the cohort of children born in lockdown who helped us might need more support and resources to help them thrive as they go through childhood and school. But we have an unanswered question. What we don't know is whether these concerns about complex thinking and planning are directly linked to being in lockdown for the first 15 months of life, or on and off lockdown for that period, or whether there's a longer term cultural shift linked to austerity, more homeworking, or different parenting approaches. So we have a born after lockdown sample that Lucy mentioned earlier, and we're going to compare those children to our born in lockdown group very carefully to answer this question. So our next steps are to complete our assessment of that second group of children. That's currently underway, and then we will be able to report the findings in comparison to a post-lockdown group. Finally, I just want to acknowledge all the members of our team from all the different universities, and to thank you very much for listening to the findings part of this session. Now I'm going to hand over to Susan Mumby, who is the head teacher of Strawberry Fields Primary School, to respond to our findings and to link them to real world life in the classroom.
Thank you, Nikki. Good afternoon, everybody. So yes, I'm Susan Mumby, and just to give you a little bit of context about my setting, I'm head teacher at Strawberry Fields Primary School, which is a larger than average suburban primary school in Leeds. We are part of a multi-academy trust of 6 schools, all of varying sizes and contexts. I do have a keen interest and background in early years education, so this research study is of particular interest to me, and I'm going to be talking about our experience at Strawberry Fields of the children born in lockdown. That's those who are now in year 1, going into year 2. And I'm also going to give the perspective of our setting alongside those of our schools across our trust, Selby Educational Trust. So in terms of our experiences of the cohort that consisted of children who were born during the lockdown, we did see that we had an increase in the number of children with speech and language difficulties, most specifically pronunciation difficulties, where we saw processing issues and limited vocabulary, so much so that we chose during that year as well that we would employ an NHS speech and language therapist services due to that increase in need as well, and continue to keep that on for the benefit of our children in school, but most notably the children in early years. We've also seen an increase in the number of children on our special educational needs and disability register, and most notably we've seen an increase of children being added to that with speech and language difficulties, autism and autistic traits, and SEMH needs as well, so social, emotional, mental health needs, and we've seen a definite increase in the numbers of children with increased anxiety as well through school. During that year, the children who were born during COVID, we did know higher levels of dysregulation amongst our children. Children really struggled to develop self-regulation strategies, meaning that we also created an additional safe space for those children in the early years setting. We have a safe space in the main part of our school, which was accessed by children from nursery to year 6, but it just wasn't enough. So we needed an additional low arousal space where children could go to with adults as well, because they struggle to self-regulate and required that co-regulation with other adults in the setting, which also meant that it was quite adult intensive as well. And some children really struggle to share their space with others. We have 26 children in our nursery, and a very big reception unit with 45 children, and some of the children really struggled with that size and with the numbers of children that were there. We saw an impact on outcomes. Some of our schools in the trust reported kind of wider gaps from those children who really struggled with personal, social and emotional development to those who were achieving their good level of development at the end of foundation stage. We saw that communication was impacted upon, and then that subsequently had an impact on writing. And in the area of personal, social and emotional development, the areas that were particularly impacted were self-care, self-regulation, as I've already explained, and social development as well. And there was an increase in the number of children engaging in solitary play, needing a lot of support in terms of those social connections with other children. We also saw a change in parenting styles as well. Milestones seem to have changed, and as a result that did impact on teaching. Yet we were still working within the same framework. It could be due to the limited interaction with the health visiting teams, lack of interaction with toddler and play groups, but the kind of milestones that some parents just were not too aware of, so what children were reaching in the early stages of life as well. So I gathered some views from staff across our trust, and these were the kinds of comments which they were making and the experiences that they had. So children often communicate more through actions than through their words. Due to delayed language, they cry, scream and make noises more than previously due to frustration and distress. Children cannot reason as they did previously. They do not have the language skills to negotiate, explain, reason and give opinions. And I think those critical thinking skills were significantly impacted upon. So that is an element which is a particular interest to us, and something that really we are focused on addressing in the early years and continue to do so. Children unable to negotiate and reject support from adults if it challenges them. Parents, we noticed, were attempting to remove barriers which may upset children. They just want them to be happy in a way that is different from pre-pandemic. And then the last comment, children have lower levels of independence in eating and changing clothes, in putting on and fastening coats and shoes. So those self-care skills were not quite as developed as those that we saw typically prior to the lockdowns. So in terms of kind of the new demographic and what we're seeing coming out of, so I guess those children that were born post-lockdown as well, we have seen an increase in children accessing pastoral support due to higher levels of anxiety and that inability to regulate their emotions. We've seen an increase in counselling referrals and wide avenues of support through our local cluster. Parenting support is in demand, but also parents are more willing to ask for that support as well, which is a positive. There's been a shift in parenting styles, Some parents just do what they can to ensure that their children don't experience those negative emotions, which is a natural thing for parents as well. But that's also normal for children to have those negative emotions, and trying to build that resilience with children to work through those emotions is all the more important as well. We are seeing, in terms of the resilience, that children do lack that resilience. They struggle to self-regulate. They, as I've said earlier, they've got difficulty with critical thinking and problem solving as well. So they need an awful lot of support in negotiating within the early years setting and thereon. And as with the study, we can certainly see how children's complex thinking and planning is an area that we're considering in terms of future staff professional development and our inclusion strategy. Children often struggle to sustain concentration as well, and when they're on devices and on screens, they can sustain their attention for a significant amount of time, but actually within a play setting, some of the children do struggle with that. And just in terms of gross motor skills, we have seen a difference also in gross motor skills, and I know this year our team at Strawberry Fields have been undertaking a leads-based project led by the early years team at Leeds City Council around noticing and responding to movement. So that's something that's really of interest, and we'll be continuing to implement next year as well. So it will be interesting to see how those emerging findings of the children born after lockdown marry with our experiences as well. I guess the implication for our settings in the future is, we are seeing this increase in SEND needs. So how we address speech and language, those social, emotional, mental health needs, and the autistic traits, and the children who are coming through with autism diagnoses, the decline in self-care and self-regulation skills that we're seeing on entry into early years, and how we support and manage that. And support and manage, and how we support parents as well. It's the wider life of the child that is so important. How children are struggling with critical thinking and problem solving, that complex thinking and planning, is of particular interest to us, and something that we're addressing in our school development plan. And then also the increasing in the anxiety levels of children and parents, and having to provide more family support than ever before. And that kind of is balanced with this. The expectation from the government, really important to have those high expectations, and they anticipate that they want at least 75% of children achieving a good level of development from 2028. Yet we're seeing children coming in with developmentally quite different needs, and then also the increased focus on foundational skills and expectations raised through the accountability measures, such as through inspection as well. So I think an interesting question for us to ask as practitioners, and the study is really helpful in kind of considering this as well, is how we navigate that tension between meeting those higher government targets whilst also meeting the children's changing developmental needs, when the focus is often on that ceiling of achievement rather than the floor of development as well. And so it'd be interesting to see how research studies such as the bicycle study support this moving forward.
Thank you, Susan. That's really fascinating to hear what the real world implications are. And actually some of the questions and answers seem to be about that too. So we will turn to those in just a few moments and give the audience a chance to interact with our speakers a bit more. Before we do though, I'd just like to acknowledge the children and families who've taken part in the bicycle study so far. And thank you all for your attention and contributions. You'll have another opportunity to also vote in our polls shortly. We've been recording today, and we'll put a link to our webinars on our website. Please do feel free to share that with anybody that you feel might be interested. And if you're able to, please also join us for our second webinar in a couple of weeks' time. And then I think we have one more slide with some useful information for you. So there's some resources here which you may feel are relevant to some of the issues that have been discussed today by the bicycle team and by Susan. We'll also pop those in the Q&A in just a moment so that you can access the links. Do sign up to our newsletter if you want to hear more about our continued progress. And finally, I'm delighted to say that the paper which Nikki and Lucy have presented today will very shortly be out in the journal Archives of Disease of Childhood. So look out for that, and there'll be lots more detail in there. So we will now stop sharing and all come onto the screen. And I can see that there's lots of questions coming in as we speak. So I'm just going to pick one that I spotted earlier that caught my eye. And this might be one that all three of you are quite well placed to answer. You might have different opinions. So I'll read it out and you can choose between you. Do you have a hypothesis as to why the experience of schools is that the number of children with SLCN has increased, but the bicycle findings suggest that on average, their receptive language is above expected levels? It's a complex question.
Shall I start? Okay, so it's a really interesting question because we were also really interested to see that result coming through, and we think there may be a number of different reasons. It may be that receptive language is actually sort of generally harder for children and teachers to sort of spot in a classroom. So it may be that what's really noticeable to people in the classroom is the expressive language, which our results show are significantly below their understanding. So it may be that there's this mismatch going on in classrooms where children are, you know, quite able, they're understanding what's going on, but they're really struggling to, they're struggling more to express themselves in relation to their levels of understanding. So it could be that the mismatch is what's noticeable. It could be that the aspect of our sample that I highlighted earlier, so the fact that we've got a slightly higher educated group of people taking part in the study, despite our best efforts, might have led to a slightly more able group of children in terms of their communication. They may have had more compensatory strategies and resources available at home during the COVID lockdown period. But it might just be that different scenarios, different types of measurement of language also affect it. So it may be that when we measure our children individually at home using language tests, that we don't see difficulties per se with their language, but in a classroom setting, which are busy and there's a lot going on and they're having to combine it with some self-regulatory skills, that there we see a vulnerability in their language scores. But we're very open to any suggestions people have, because this is something we're really interested in exploring. It isn't the result we expected. I don't know if all my colleagues want to add anything.
I mean, I agree with you in terms of the context as well, because you know, obviously it's a sample as well, and in terms of sort of our trust, we're speaking on behalf of 6 schools, some of whom are in, you know, really deprived areas and have a real mix of context and background. So I think sort of the sample does have quite a high number of educated parents who are mothers, and in terms of that degree level education as well. So yeah, potentially you know, it could be the sample as well. Yeah, and we're only 6 schools that we're speaking on behalf of. I'm sure that every individual school across the country has got a very different experience.
Thank you. There's another one that's kind of related here, I think, and it's directed to you, Susan. Do you have a view on why parents are so anxious about their children being distressed? And do you feel that that is a longer term trend that you're seeing post-lockdown?
Yeah, I guess thinking during lockdown, parents had that time at home with their child to attend to their needs on a one-to-one basis quite significantly, and a lot of the nurseries were closed. They were at home doing their parenting, and so children didn't have the experience of being with other children, where they're struggling to negotiate and collaborate and have those frustrations, and I think parents they just want their children to be happy. And I think lockdown was a really tough time. The whole country was really suffering in a negative way, that people didn't want their children to be suffering and coming out of lockdown. I think parents just don't want their children to get upset. They don't want to have the distress that they've experienced in recent years. And you know, it's not, I don't want to be critical of parents and families as well, because it's completely understandable that they are feeling about their children as well. coming back into schools following lockdown, but it's accepting that those are natural emotions. But I don't think it's just the early years. I think sort of parenting per se, we're seeing, and I think it's that understanding as well of mental health and well-being as well. And we're seeing an increased number of children who are having days off school for well-being days, what parents are terming well-being days, and parents come in talking about their children with anxiety, and it becomes part of the language, which is good that people are talking about their mental health and well-being. But it's making sure that we're allowing children to feel those more negative emotions and know how to deal with and managing them, looking to how they're then going to take them forward into young adulthood as well.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just finding the comment that I spotted and have lost. Here it is. What implications do the findings have for the government's 75% target, and how can we ensure that these findings reach national and local level decision makers? The million-dollar question.
I think this is a difficult one, and we're hoping you will help us with this. We have some contacts with media, and we are hoping to sort of use that as a way of platforming our results and making sure they get coverage and wider understanding and people see them. And we are preparing and have actually prepared already some professional facing leaflets and more layperson facing leaflets to distribute. We're also planning to get appointments with policymakers and talk about our findings. So we have a whole series of plans in place to try and get these findings to those people who need them immediately. We have to just say that we didn't intend to report at this stage, because this is a stage where we don't have both of our samples, the born in lockdown and the born after lockdown. And we do really appreciate that it's important to compare these samples, particularly given what Susan's been telling us, because some of these effects may be longer term and they may have just been changes that are still with us. So we nevertheless had a very strong feeling that it was our sort of role to report what we have so far on the born in lockdown children and share that, whilst making sure everyone understands that more is to come, because this is a broader, more like nuanced story that we have more to say about. So I hope that sort of answers your question, but we are super open to any comments or suggestions that you might have for how we can get these results out to those who need them.
Thanks, Lucy. And there's a question around which assessments we use to assess receptive and expressive language skills. And I know that any of you would be able to answer that better than me. So whoever would like to take that one.
I can take that. We use
you.
the Clinical Evaluation of Language Fundamentals preschool version, the core language scale on that, and the British Picture Vocabulary Scale.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's probably worth just mentioning that for the wider study, we do also have some wider language measures such as narrative, but we haven't reported on those yet because we really need a comparison group to look at those, because they're not a standard. It's not a standardized measure. It's more freestyle speech and language.
Thank you. And here's one which I think we probably anticipated might come up. So I will read it out for you now. Do you think that one of the additional factors could be increased screen use, potentially occurring during lockdown as at home more, and then has continued since? So that kind of cultural shift that you were referring to potentially, Nikki.
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So we are not experts, it needs to be said, on screen use or screen time. And it's not directly built into our hypotheses, but we do have some measures which we will be able to compare at the end of the study to look at that in more detail. Our preliminary feeling is that screens are somewhat being used as a scapegoat for fixing other problems, so that it's sometimes used as an easy topic to talk about or an easy thing to implement politically, when in fact what would be more useful to these families would be more resources in classrooms and in communities. So we think what's probably more important than screen use, because that's a very umbrella term. It uses, there's lots of different types of screen use. There's lots of different ways of your child engaging with the screen. What's probably more interesting to look at is enrichment strategies in families. So what else are the families doing with children? So what sort of different activities like reading or baking or gardening or puzzles or board games, all those sorts of non-screen activities are probably more important to look at. So it may be not so much important how much time you spend on the screen, so long as you've got the other enrichment activities going on in your family as well. But at the moment, this isn't something we've unpicked from the data, because we need our post-lockdown, our born after lockdown group to really look at it. But it's a really interesting question, and we do have our eye on it.
Thanks, Nikki. And we've got a comment here that I suspect you might want to respond to. So this person says, I noticed that the participant group was described as diverse. However, 166 of the 205 were white British, with only 39 from other ethnic backgrounds. And they wonder whether this might have influenced the findings. And they also would like to ask whether socioeconomic status was considered, and say, for future studies, would we plan to recruit a wider and more diverse participant pool to ensure broader representation?
It's a great question, and I'll take that one as well. So we did our very best. We would like it to be more diverse. We did our very best to recruit as diverse a group as possible. One of our strategies for that was that families who take part in Bicycle get to keep a tablet as an incentive, and that seems to have brought in a lot of people who might not otherwise have been interested in taking part in research. So we're trying to get the diversity. We've managed it in lots of different ways. The ethnicity backgrounds are actually fairly representative of the English distribution, but I hear you that it may well have affected what we find. So we always have to be really careful to say that the findings here are relatable to the types of families who took part in the Bicycle study. And as you say, they were mostly white British families. So we really have to keep that in mind. I hope that answers the question. In answer to the second part, we are absolutely looking at socioeconomic status. But again, what we want to do there is wait until we've got this second group of families taking part who were born after lockdown. We have done something called pre-registering this study, which means we put our research questions sort of on the web before we start collecting, so that we're very accountable and we don't just make things up halfway. And our pre-registered questions involve a socio characteristics analysis to see whether families were affected differently, because our hypothesis is that it wasn't the same for all families, and that different families will be affected in different ways. But that's likely to be really complex, and not necessarily just in a sort of a disadvantage sort of dichotomy, but in a much more complex and nuanced way. So we've got lots and lots of socio-demographic characteristics, information from the families, and that's going to go into a sort of more complex analysis when we've got both samples, when all families have helped.
Thanks, Nikki. I think we've probably got time for just a couple more, and then I may move us on to the audience polls. This is one that could be relevant to the Bicycle team or to Susan, so please, decide amongst yourselves. But what do you think the impact is of difficulties with complex thinking and planning? Would they be things they suggest like delayed skills development, difficulty learning complex skills like toileting or self-care, or is it something different?
So I'm happy to start with this one. Complex thinking and planning, or executive function, self-regulation, it has a lot of names, but these are quite fundamental skills that allow a child to sort of thrive in their environment by adapting their behavior to the needs and the demands that are happening at the time. So children who struggle with this may forget instructions. They may only remember the first thing you say to them, but not the last thing you say to them. They may find it difficult to adjust to a change in activity, so they may become upset if they want to carry on doing the activity that they're doing at the moment. And this can have implications both in a family setting or in a public setting, but also certainly in a school setting where it's inevitable that you're going to be moving from one activity to another. And that flexibility and being able to move and shift is important. So all of these skills and things like staying on task, being like age appropriately resistant to distraction, these are things that fundamentally affect how well the child is going to thrive, certainly in the more formal environments of schooling. And it's going to be difficult or more challenging for them to access the curriculum and the learning that Susan and her colleagues and all the education professionals are providing if those skills are, a little bit delayed or a particular challenge for that child. So I personally think it can affect a whole load of skills, both at the time, in a whole load of settings, and it can be an onward issue for children, transitioning to secondary school where these skills are even more important. And we have, demands that are requiring more self-regulation, more organization, and more independence. So I think in a way they're foundational to an awful lot of the child's sort of development and thriving. So I hope that sort of answers. I don't really want to talk about toileting because, again, we're not experts on that. We know that that's hit the media a lot and it's probably involved, but I'm going to just shy away from that because I don't feel I'm expert enough to comment specifically.
Thanks, Lucy. And did you want to come in, Susan? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think from a practical perspective as well within school, we are definitely seeing a shift and a change in children's executive functioning skills as well. So much so that we have done some training with staff this year, and it's part of our inclusion strategy moving forward into next year as well. We see that children struggle to organise themselves, struggle to kind of think about the process of learning and the steps that they need to take, a lot of frustration and dysregulation as well. So a lot of our work in schools as well is around strategies to self-regulate if you are feeling frustrated, if you are feeling that something is a challenge, because we've seen a big impact on resilience and resilient learners through school as well, and that's going right from nursery up to year 6 as well. So a lot of implications there, and often they need an adult to support and guide them through that. But what we are also seeing is a reduction in our budgets, and so a reduction in the numbers of teaching assistants who are available to co-regulate children and to support them with the routines and the structures and the organisation and the next steps. So it is getting even harder as well. So that continues to be a focus for us, but a massive impact on children being able to learn within the classroom.
Thank you. Thank you to the audience for your really thoughtful questions. That's been a real pleasure to read those, and thanks to our speakers for answering them so calmly and coolly. And now I am going to turn to something a little bit different. So in a moment, you should see a poll pop up in the middle of your screen, and I'd like you please to vote in it when you do. So it's just coming now. Here we are. So please do tell us which aspects of children's development you are concerned about. Select all that apply, or of course select that you have no concerns if you would prefer to do that. I'll leave that up for a moment so that you have a chance to read the options. And once you submit your response, you should also see other people's responses climbing in the poll. So once you've clicked your submit button, you should be able to see what other people have said too. Thank you very much. I can see that lots of people have contributed to that one. So I shall close that poll and give you a second one. And this one, sorry. Just take a second to come up. There we are. If you have concerns, which of the following interventions might best address them? And again, please do tell us any of those that you think would be appropriate. Thank you. And here's our final poll. We'd like you to give us your honest feedback on today's webinar. It's been really valuable to us to hear your thoughts. Fantastic. Thank you both. Thank you so much for your contributions to the Q&A and for your attention and to the polls. That's all been incredibly useful. I hope you found this afternoon's webinar informative. I'd like to thank once again Professor Nikki Botting and Professor Lucy Henry for their presentations, and special thanks to Susan Mumby, our guest speaker. It's been a pleasure having you, Susan. Thank you. I hope you all have a very pleasant evening. Thanks for coming.